You are Locked On Wolves POSCAST, part of Locked On Minnesota on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
T-Wolves season ends on a sour note. 30-point beatdown in OKC in Game 5. Wolves lose Western Conference Finals now back-to-back years. They must spend another offseason trying to figure out what the missing pieces are, right? What the missing links are. We'll get into all that. But welcome back in the lab. Back at it, another T-Wolves Postcast episode right here on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Network. Your team every day. Jack Borman with me as always. Give him a follow at JaredBorman13. Jack, Wolves get blown out again. Just off the top, though, just knee-jerk reaction here. Game just ended 4 or 5 minutes ago. Did you think they came out with the right, I don't know what the words are, intensity, heart, if you will, I guess, to match OKC in their own building? Arguably the toughest place to play in the NBA right now.
Yeah, they certainly didn't come out with the energy that they needed. I think that certainly some missed shots kind of added on. The weight of each missed shot you could feel was pretty cumulative, and we've seen that happen to the to the Timberwolves, and especially earlier on in this postseason and down the stretch of the season at times. And so it was just I think a little disappointing for sure that the Timberwolves fractured somewhat quickly, and I think Timberwolves fans expected that this team would probably hang in there a little bit longer and want to fight more than they showed in that first quarter. But it was just unfortunate that I thought that everybody looked pretty timid and scared, and people reverted to trying to do things themselves and not playing team basketball. And it's just not a way that you're going to be able to take down this Oklahoma City team, especially on the road in Oklahoma City, where they've been truly fantastic all postseason long.
Yeah, they look like a absolute gauntlet, the final boss, right, in every video game. Lots to get into. Biggest turning point in this one. Some offseason chatter I want to ask you about. I want to pick your brain about this long offseason we got to talk about. And what we'll remember the most, too, about this year, this magical Western Conference final run. But first, quick reminder, tonight's episode brought to us by Monarch Money. Monarch Money, take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Season ends, obviously, another tough loss in OKC, Game 5. Hell of a run, man. Hell of a run. A lot of fun. Biggest takeaway, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this Game 5, but just your biggest takeaway, that first half, as you watch them get the doors blown off and just kind of get manhandled. Down 10, down 20, now down 30, down up to 37 at one point. Knowing their season was on the line, just your biggest takeaways and main topics from Game 5.
Yeah, I kind of nailed it off the top with just how they came out looking super timid and tight. And I think part of it is just that there wasn't really anybody that was able to step up and help Ant out in the first few minutes there. And I think the fact that he was very clearly pressing and trying to do everything that he could to keep the Wolves in it and try to provide them some sort of life offensively. And other guys just weren't making shots and helping him out. And I just think that this Timberwolves team is way too talented to not be able to provide him the necessary help to at least make this a competitive game. And I think it certainly showed some of the holes that this roster has. I think for as much as everybody here loves Mike Conley and as great as he's been since he's been here, I just think it's hard to rely on a 37-year-old guy in his 18th season to to be kind of that, number two guy in the backcourt for the Timberwolves. And I think, whether or not Rob Dillingham is ready next year, I think, probably at this point doesn't really seem like that's a super likely thing. So I think trying to figure out who you're going to place next to Anthony Edwards in that starting lineup in that guard spot is going to be a fascinating conversation. I think it showed some holes there. I think another takeaway that I had was just kind of a, looking back at the rest of the series, the Timberwolves clawed back into it a little bit in that third quarter with some zone. And I think part of you wants to say, okay, was that a lever that they could have pulled sooner? Was that something that they could have done earlier in games 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever? A lot of the zones that they showed in different 4 or 5 minute stretches of playing zone, the Thunder just carved it up. And so I think it's easy to take that small sample and kind of go back and say, okay, that this could have changed the game, but I don't necessarily think that was the case. And I just wish that the Timberwolves would have showed some fight, especially on the offensive end of the floor, being willing to move the ball and get everybody a touch a little earlier on in the game. But, I don't think there's a whole lot that you can take away from a Game 5 blowout like this that is going to force your hand with any decisions. I think certainly the manner in which the game was lost was definitely disappointing, and I think may create some questions, but I don't think there's anything declarative to come out of this game without kind of evaluating the series as a whole, or the playoffs as a whole, or or the entire season as a whole. But definitely disappointing that the Timberwolves had more turnovers, 14, than made shots, 12 in that first half, and just that no one was really able to establish any type of offensive rhythm. And it just looked like a lot of individuals trying to do their own thing out there. And like I said before, it's just you got no chance to beat Oklahoma City if that's kind of how you're approaching things on offense, no matter how poorly things are going with anything else that you're trying. So I think there was just way too much dribbling into crowds, not knowing where the help is going to come from, even though this is the 5th time they've played them in 9 days. And you've played them 4 times in the regular season, so you kind of know what they want to try to do defensively, and just a lot of unforced, silly turnovers that I think was kind of a hallmark of this series for the Timberwolves, and certainly something that I think for the majority of the season they did a much better job of improving upon, and it's certainly, I think, something that you can look back as a positive in this season. But in some of the most crucial moments, they really struggled with turnovers in that last series against Golden State. Yeah. And again, in this series against Oklahoma City, which takes me back to maybe potentially getting some more help in the backcourt, no matter how you're able to do that. But I think that's going to be an important priority.
I'm a big NFL guy. NFL is a copycat league. Okay, everybody just watched the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl. What does everybody try to emulate? They try to go build through the trenches, and especially because the Vikings lost in the fashion they did in LA, getting just absolutely manhandled by their defensive line. They went out and beat up their offensive line, but it's all basically in the back of their minds, like, how are we going to beat Philly, though, right? How do we beat Philly? When you look at OKC, is there something specific that teams, and the Wolves specifically, I guess, need to kind of build to, I don't know, just be able to compete with that? Because I just think OKC looks so dominant right now, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon.
For sure. They're definitely not going away anytime soon, because they'll be able to sign their core 3 guys, and then they've still got a boatload of picks in the next 5 or 6 years here. So they're going to be able to be pretty creative and agile on the margins in a way that contenders certainly need to be to sustain windows now, especially in this second apron era of the NBA. But I think for anybody, you just need to have ball handlers that can handle the pressure that they put on you defensively. And then you also need to have point of attack defenders that can keep guys like Jalen Williams and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in front of them. And if you can do that and force, not have to not have to bring 2 and 3 guys to defend one or both of those guys, I think that makes a huge difference. And the Wolves certainly tried to do that as best they could in this series, but just didn't have enough to get it done. And I think that you've got to give Oklahoma City a lot of credit for the way that they've the way that they've been able to build a team that's been totally predicated on what you can control, and that's defensive effort, and that's being able to dictate the game and have it be played on your terms. And Sam Presti deserves a lot of credit for the way that he's gotten Chet, Jalen Williams, Hartenstein, who was not quite as big of a factor in this series, but has been really important for them throughout the entire regular season, with Holmgren missing so many games. And then being able to trade Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso straight up, I thought was one of the crazier NBA trades in a while. And then have Case and Wallace as well coming off the bench is crazy. So like I said, ball handling is probably the number one thing. But hey, look, Tim Connolly came from Denver, and he kind of put the blueprint together for how to stop Jokic and at that time the class of the Western Conference. And I don't really think that anybody was anticipating that Dallas was going to pivot off of Luka Doncic, but they were the class of the West last season. And I think, again, you need to have all the different defenders. Clearly that's what Oklahoma City was thinking when they made that trade, was that you need to have as many of these, super rugged, physical, strong perimeter defenders that can make life really difficult for the opposing handlers. When you think that you've got Anthony Edwards, Steph Curry, Devin Booker, Luka, LeBron, players like that in the Western Conference, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, so that's definitely part of it. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how the league goes about trying to approach how can we construct a roster that can overcome what Oklahoma City can do. And I think last year the answer was probably size, with Chet really being the only big that they have. But now they have another one in Isaiah Hartenstein who can play alongside Chet because of Chet's ability to shoot the ball. So it'll just be really fascinating to see how the entire top half of the Western Conference goes about it, because there's certainly going to be teams that are going to be able to improve upon what they did this season when you factor in injuries and some roster movement stuff that happened at the trade deadline and will certainly happen this offseason. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity, and I'm very eager to see how Tim Connolly approaches it.
Yeah, good segue. Let's talk about more of these off-season talkers for the Wolves. That's all coming up right after this. Quick reminder, tonight's episode brought to us by Monarch Money. You ever go check your bank account and go, where did all my money go? Dining out, online shopping, entertainment. So easy to lose track, isn't it? Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your own personal CFO, Monarch Money gives you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money, it's not just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending, all in one place. So you stop just managing your money, and instead you start building some actual wealth. I know when I used Monarch Money for the first time, I realized how much I was spending on streaming services, right? We all do it. Max, Netflix, Apple TV, you name it, I had it. Now I budget smarter. I save more than ever. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com. 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your entire first year. All right, let's do some just rapid fire. I mean, I wish we could go 90 minutes because I know you could cover all these guys in depth at length, but just some rapid fire offseason talkers. Again, a lot to cover. 60, 90 seconds, your best 60, 90 seconds on each name I rip off here. In fact, before I get to the names, you tell me, initial just knee-jerk reaction, early thoughts as we sit here, on the eve of the Wolves offseason that'll begin tomorrow morning, right? Let's start here. Who's the foundational pieces that are here to stay no matter what? Your building blocks for the next few years, like the non-negotiables, you can say without a doubt, these guys need to be a part of the foundation of the team.
Yeah, for me, the only guy that I would put in that category is Anthony Edwards. And the reason why I would do that is, I just don't know that the Timberwolves are consider Jaden McDaniels an off-limits player. I personally would. I think that when you think that, or when you see what he's been able to do with the ball in his hands more, I think being able to continually empower him more and more and more is going to be really important, because I do think he can be a guy that can average 20, 22 points a game over a season while also providing you excellent defense. And he's a guy too that's been incredibly available for the Wolves pretty much his entire career, outside of that one wall that got in the way of his hand a few years ago. But so it'd be those two guys for me, and then everyone else after that is probably going to be in the conversation of being able to be moved in some capacity. I think Dante DiVincenzo, also with his contract, is a guy that I would certainly try to prioritize keeping if the Timberwolves can, just because I think that there's more production that they can get out of him next season and beyond. So that's that. But the one thing that I will say is that Tim Connolly has shown to be incredibly patient. And he's not a guy that's going to, negotiate or operate from a position of weakness.
Doesn't turn and burn a lot year after year after year. No,
he really, and if he is going to turn and burn in some capacity, like everyone thought that he was going to trade D'Angelo Russell the season before that he was traded, and he waited it out. And D'Lo played really well for a few months. And then they traded him at the deadline for what ended up being a complete heist in getting Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and a pick that ended up becoming Leonard Miller and another second-round pick, which now I believe is going to be the first pick in that second round this coming year. So, or this coming off season. So again, just going to be really interested, and with Carl too. Like I personally had heard that Carl was very close to getting traded right before Summer League, and Tim Connolly waited it out until right before training camp, and then made that move. So I just think that he's not a guy that's going to get rushed into doing something that he doesn't think is what's best for the future direction of the franchise. And Tim too has a decision to make in terms of his opt out, opt in. It's widely expected that he'll sign a new contract extension once the ownership transition is fully realized here in the next few weeks. But so it'll be kind of interesting to see what they do.
All right, 60 seconds. Let's start with the A topic, man. Julius Randle. A lot of heat taken right now in the chat and just throughout the obviously entire Minnesota Timberwolves fan base right now, because the body language was so choppy. I guess that's a light way to put it, the last two games. But how do you weigh that, right, with such a fantastic second half of the season? $31 million player option. Julius Randle, your knee-jerk reaction thoughts, what Tim Connolly's going to have to decide.
Yeah, I think for him, the first question is, does he want to opt into that player option or not? If I were in Julius Randle's shoes, I personally would, because I think that opens up the opportunity for him to then get traded and then sign an extension once he were to get traded somewhere. So he and his agent could say, hey, this team is willing to give me an extension. If I opt in, maybe you can negotiate and trade me here. Or maybe he opts in and then the Timberwolves are able to sign him to a more team-friendly extension that is somewhat close to what the Wolves did with Rudy, where, it's, less than a max. It might be below what some of his perceived market value is, but it's hey, I want to be here. I really like this environment. I want to grow with this team. So if he opts out, then that will make it somewhat difficult for the Wolves to be able to kind of maintain that salary slot, if you will, and continue to build out that way. But even if he does end up going somewhere in, free agency, I think just with a guy of his caliber that's going to command a contract north of $25 million a year, probably those types of guys are moving now in sign and trade. So you could get some value back for him. But I think for me, he deserves a ton of credit for what he did in this postseason and the way that he assimilated as nicely as he did after being injured and coming back. And I do think that you could potentially get more out of Julius Randle if, more of this Julius Randle out of him, if you have maybe a little bit more spacing around him. But then again, you weigh that against, okay, you're insulated by McDaniels and Gobert. If you take one of those guys away, how does that look? So I honestly would go, I think it's 50-50 if he's back next year or not. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, that's kind of where the snowball effect starts, right? Like that's the first decision that needs to be made. And then maybe the second one, Naz Reid. I mean, nobody lost more money, I think, during this, playoff run than Naz Reid, $15 million player option. Obviously everybody loves Naz Reid here, right? Naz Reid towel night. We all know it, but just the way he kind of fell off. And I don't know if you have some insight. Maybe you thought it was his role. Anything changed during the playoffs? What happened? But Naz Reid, a personal fan favorite. Your knee-jerk reaction as far as his future here in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think Naz is a really tough one because he was pretty inconsistent from game to game throughout this postseason, but certainly had flashes of brilliance. And you think that you think of game one against the Lakers when he was truly excellent in that game. You think of, honestly, game one against Golden State. He was awesome in that game as well and made multiple threes in the first three games of that series. But after that, it was just really tough sledding from three. And I think that his role as a six man might honestly be the best role for him. If you can't be consistent enough as a scorer in that role in the postseason, I just don't know that they're going to be able to scale him up in a super meaningful way. And what was also unfortunate was he got blown by quite a bit and really struggled to defend in space beyond some of his reps against Luka Doncic, who's obviously a slower and burlier guy who I think has the profile of a guy that's easier for him to defend, but you saw Jonathan Kuminga and Jimmy Butler really took advantage of him in the last series, and then in this series when he got switched on to Jalen Williams or SGA, even Chet Holmgren at times, it didn't go so great. So I think with Naz, if the KD conversation ends up coming up, obviously Randall would be part of that in some capacity. But if Kevin Durant ends up coming in some way, it's hard for me to imagine that Naz would be back. And I think that, you obviously have to consider the cult hero aspect of it. And that's obviously a really tough part of transactions. But I just think the Timberwolves are going to do what they think is best for them. And again, there's not a lot of teams with cap space out there. So if Naz were to move and want to go play somewhere where he could have more minutes, more money, more opportunity, it would likely be in a sign and trade where the Wolves would be getting some compensation back. I mean, compensation in sign and trade is obviously less than a standard trade, but it'll be interesting because San Antonio had interest in him when he was a free agent a few years ago. And he is a profile of a guy that fits really well next to Wembanyama, so that might be an interesting one to consider. But the Spurs have also shown interest in Kevin Durant, so we'll see what happens. But I think given how close he is with Jaden and Ant, I would expect that Naz is back, maybe 75-25.
Okay, I like that. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, unrestricted free agent. I'm a little in the dark as far as what the numbers might look like. It feels like every time, conversations have been brought up about offseason talkers, who's staying, who's going, it feels like the first person everybody tells me is Nas got to be one of the first guys to go. Are you in that camp? And if not, I guess what does the money need to look like?
I think that, for me, I think there's an argument to be made that Nickeil Alexander-Walker could be a guy that the Wolves need to prioritize given the dearth of ball handling that we've talked about. And that, I don't think Dillingham has shown this season that he's ready to be a high level point guard just at this stage. And that's okay. Rob Dillingham is going to be his second year in the league and was a little bit more of an upside play anyways, and more of a long-term bet rather than hey, we need you to be impactful right away. And for now, it's just really tough to pin down of what a number could be. Like I could see a team giving him the full non-taxpayer mid-level of about $14 million next season.
Okay.
And, the unfortunate part of that is that if he doesn't meet that, it's hard to see him getting more than what would be the taxpayer mid-level of $6 million. And obviously teams can chunk up their mid-level and give part of it to one guy, part of it to another. But I think Nickeil has earned his way to price out the Wolves, and he's been incredible. Like we talked about the other night, went out with a bang at Target Center in front of a raucous crowd. And I want the best for Nickeil. And if that means getting more money elsewhere, I'll be rooting for him. I would drive him to the airport and thank him for all the great memories and joy that he's brought so many people, because he's played every single game. And that literally has played every single game this season and leaves everything out there. And it is just a super easy guy to root for. And my 9'2", brother, I'll be rooting for Nickeil, but I'd be really surprised if he was back next season, considering that Jalen Clark and TJ Shannon both seem ready to enter the rotation.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes it's a numbers game, man. It's not personal. It's a business. We see that in every sport. But definitely. Yeah. Appreciate everything Nas done, for the Wolves for sure. Rudy, here's my last one. Rudy, a lot of strong opinions on Rudy Gobert. Obviously signed that 2-year extension. Contract gets a little bit cheaper now, right? From here on out. What's your thoughts? Where are you at right now with the future of the Timberwolves and where Rudy Gobert kind of fits in these blueprint and these plans, I guess, moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think that if Rudy Gobert were to get traded this offseason, I think that he would deserve a lot of credit. And the reason why I say that is because Anthony Edwards has been able to get to a place that not many people are able to get to, and that's to have 45 games of postseason experience that Anthony Edwards has by the end of his age 23 season is pretty remarkable. And that was a huge bet that the Timberwolves took when they made that trade for Gobert, that he would raise their floor to such a level that would allow Ant to gain that experience. But he's just been a fairly limited player for the Wolves in the postseason. And I think his inability to find meaningful ways to improve his offensive game beyond some short roll passing stuff has just limited his ability to impact things in the postseason. And it does raise an interesting question of like, if this is the last year that you might be able to get some value for Rudy instead of having to pay to get off of him. I mean, the Timberwolves don't have a first round pick that they can trade moving forward right now. And so being able to potentially move Rudy and get a pick of value, while then maybe, okay, if you do that, then that's maybe opening up a pathway to more minutes for Nas or TJ or Jalen Clark or something like that, but would definitely be a bet on going smaller. And that would just be something that would be pretty interesting, considering that Rob Dillingham is a pick and roll playmaking point guard and is a guy that has shown really good chemistry with Gobert this early on. And moving off of him, I think would solely be to try to stockpile some more assets, maybe cut Rudy's contract up into getting another ball handler. That might be your avenue to do that. And then try to sign, a center in free agency with your non-taxpayer, or excuse me, with your taxpayer mid-level exception at about $5.7 million is what it's projected for this summer. So that's kind of the big one that I think would be really interesting. But I know that Rudy Gobert is super highly thought of inside the building and has been a huge reason why this Timberwolves team has done something it's never done before, and that's go to back-to-back Western Conference Finals. And if you would have said, when the Jazz traded both of those guys, who would go to back-to-back back-to-back conference finals, I think most people would have bet on Donovan Mitchell, but it's been Rudy Gobert, and deserves a ton of credit for what he's done.
How about the draft? I'm a huge NFL draft guy. I love to nerd out about these mock drafts and everything else. Probably start deep diving tomorrow morning, to be honest. But Wolves stole that 17th overall pick, which we love. And then they, again, it sounds like they should have the first overall pick in the second round, pick 31 as well. Just early thoughts. Obviously, it's very early in the process, but early thoughts, maybe what position is deep in this draft class, what they maybe should do with those two picks. Do they package them? Do they trade out? Do they trade back and stockpile for future years? What put your GM cap on? What do you want to do with these two picks?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of really toolsy wings and two-way wings that can play more of a role on the offensive end of the floor, more of a low usage role, I should say. Kind of, I don't want to necessarily say 3-and-D, but guys that are like Jalen Clark, where they're not going to be a liability on the offensive end because they have some connective tissue. They can put the ball on the floor and finish inside. They have some shooting chops. They play within themselves and also have some really high floor or, immediate impact, high floor defensive capabilities. And so I think that's something that they'll look at with more experienced wings and guards towards the back end of the lottery. I think then the other thing that's been somewhat, I guess, disappointing for the Timberwolves is that there's been a lot of guys that teams would have expected to be there late in the first, early in the second round that have actually been backing out of the draft and have been going back to school after going through that pre-draft process. That's something that I don't necessarily know if it will, lower the value of that 31st pick in a meaningful way, but certainly is worse than the alternative of all those guys staying in the draft and just providing with the Wolves with some more options. But the other thing the Wolves could potentially do is if they do end up pivoting off of any of those guys that we talked about before, they could trade that pick 17. If anybody slides and there's a team looking to be more aggressive and trading up to acquire, a first round pick, next year or in a future year that they might be able to move in a trade, whether that be at the deadline or something like that. That's just something to keep in mind since, like I said earlier, the Timberwolves don't have a future first that they can trade before draft night.
I got one more segment for you. What we'll be talking about, just a recap, highlights, lowlights, things you'll remember the most from this really fun, epic season that obviously ended on a sour note, but nonetheless, a lot of good takeaways. That's all coming up, though, right after this. Quick reminder, tonight's episode also brought to us by BetterHelp. BetterHelp. Let's get the right ad up there. There we go. BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with work projects and more, easy to let your priorities start to slip, even when we know what makes us happy. But When you feel like you got no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy, they become more important than ever. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, it's time to give BetterHelp a try. Entirely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. So simple. All you got to do, you fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched up with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Go visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon, getting 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, here's the bottom line here, Jack. As brutal as this series was, back-to-back Western Conference final appearances, nothing to sneeze at, man, especially in this loaded Western Conference where it's like 8 to 10 teams deep every year to start the season. What's the message? What's the takeaways? What's the group chats talking about after another great run? And what are you going to remember the most? Highlights, lowlights, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think I'll remember how this team showed the resolve that I think a lot of fans wanted to see after things didn't start the way that they wanted to. And I think the way that they found a way to kind of remake themselves, play a different brand of basketball, a little bit more balanced brand of basketball than the Timberwolves did last season, and found ways to be able to win games with their offense and their defense was super fun. And I think to see the Timberwolves come out and just totally take care of business in that first series against the Lakers. And you can't control Steph getting hurt, obviously, but again, just being able to find ways to win. Those were some ugly basketball games against Golden State that they just kind of hung in there and got the job done. And I think that playoff experience is just going to matter. And that's, again, nothing that you can sneeze at. I mean, for Anthony Edwards, still just 23 years old, has already been to 2 Western Conference finals. Steph, LeBron, Giannis, Jokic, SGA, none of those guys reached 2 conference finals before they turned 24. The only guy that has been able to do that was Kevin Durant. And that's really the only other comp that I can think of. And I just think that the Timberwolves being able to, I think, also have a period where they were able to tap into some guys' skills that they didn't really know. Maybe not that they didn't necessarily know that they had, but I think sometimes injuries create opportunities. And I think what we saw when Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert were both hurt in that stretch and right around the All-Star break, that and leading up to the All-Star break, that we learned more about Jaden McDaniels. We learned more about Naz Reid. We learned more about Dante DiVincenzo and Nickeil Alexander-Walker and how those guys just really fit into the fabric of this team and made the team really, really fun to watch down the stretch. And I think, again, with Julius Randle, a week ago, we were all talking about how it would be a no-brainer to sign Julius Randle to an extension with the way that he's played in this offseason. And he's a super well-liked guy inside that locker room. And I think sometimes fans with Julius Randle, some cases very similar to Karl Anthony Towns, just cling on to the negative a lot more than the positive, just because of the body language and how it looks. And I think that is unfortunate. But the Timberwolves were like 30-7 over the last 37 games that Julius Randle played in, and he had a huge hand in winning. And again, like I said, I'll just always remember the way that this team was able to remake itself in the last, 6 to 8 weeks of the season, and then kept it rolling into the postseason. And despite teams not really having a whole lot of faith in them against LA, myself included, and then against Golden State as well, what was really fun. And like I said, you can't fake experience, and you can't fake what you'll learn from it. And Anthony Edwards has added meaningful things to his game every single summer. And after playing in the Olympics last year, the World Cup the year before that, he's got a full summer off here to go get after it and refine his game, whether that's finishing better at the rim, mid-post stuff, overall mid-range game. I think fans should be really excited about what they've seen from Ant. He's going into the offseason healthy, and it has just been a joy to watch his growth and maturation on the court and off the court too, with everything that Chris Finch has talked about with him from a leadership perspective. So I think now with Ant kind of starting to enter in the early years of his prime next year, the year after that, I think he's going to hear everybody talking about SGA, about Wemby, about the Rockets potentially. Are the Warriors gonna have one last ride? And then obviously the Luka era in Los Angeles. There's going to be a lot of people that I think will want to talk about those teams before they talk about the Wolves. And I think that'll be a real motivator for Ant. And so I think when you combine all those things with the excitement of what we talked about for a good chunk of the show, of how the Wolves kind of remake themselves from here, it's a super exciting opportunity. So whether they add another guard, they add a playmaking wing, another center potentially, they'll have some options at 17 and at 31. It'll just be really fun to see where the Timberwolves go from here. And I think no matter how disappointing it was to see them go out with such a whimper tonight, I still don't think that it's a reason to say you need to blow up this team that's in a fine spot moving forward financially. That was part of the reason why they made the Cat trade. And I think when you've got one of the 5 or 6 guys in the NBA that everybody points to, everybody talks about, you're always going to have a chance. And that's what the Wolves have right now. And they've had a chance the last couple of years, and they've lost to teams that have definitively proven themselves to be the best in the Western Conference. And it's just the way it goes. And I think, again, Wolves are in very good hands with Tim Connolly. And I think a lot of people will talk about some of the moves that Tim Connolly has made over the last 3 seasons and say, you know what, I maybe didn't love that move when it happened, but
yeah,
it ended up working out. And I just need to trust him.
He's earned that trust
for sure.
This point, for sure. As tough as this loss is right now, Jack, as frustrating as it is there a chance we look back and say, good gosh, that OKC team, like, where's this OKC team? They still got to go beat whoever comes out of the East, probably Halliburton and the Pacers. But does it feel like this OKC team, we're going to look back, the entire NBA landscape is going to look back and go, that team was so good. Like I don't know who you compare it to. Golden State, Steph Curry. I have no idea. I mean, you tell me, you're the expert. But is there a part of you that thinks we look back and say, maybe it wasn't so much the Wolves just, fell apart on their own, but OKC was just that good?
Yeah, I think that's, people think about them as one of the truly elite defenses of the last, really, of this millennium, since 2000. The way that they fly around, their activity, their playmaking, their ability to defend the rim and defend the perimeter equally as well, it is pretty crazy. And then when you've got a guy who's proven himself to be one of, if not the best guards in the NBA and SGA, leading the charge, playing super efficient basketball, and a bunch of guys that understand the game and play really well around him without the ball in their hands. Yeah, it's a team that people are going to keep talking about. And the scary thing is they're probably only going to be able to get better from here. And they've got more flexibility than just about any team in the league in terms of what direction they want to go in. And it seems like they've got 3, really 4 if you count Caruso, with him signing the extension last offseason, and Hartenstein, I guess, too, signed a 3 or 4 year deal. So they've got 4 or 5 guys that they know they're going to have around for a while, and then add in all those draft picks to fill some of those holes that you talk about. And then they also have Nikola Topic, who was drafted with like the 12th pick, and at different points drafted with the 12th pick last year, tore his ACL and hasn't played at all this year, but was widely regarded as the guy that could have gone top 5, top 7 if he hadn't had that injury. So it's pretty scary to think that they're going to keep getting better. But when you have a team that totally dominates the turnover game, points off turnovers, forcing turnovers, not turning it over themselves, the way that Oklahoma City has, it's certainly been historic in that department. And when you're able to do that, your chances of winning games are pretty darn good. And they certainly showed that, and they've earned every bit of where they are right now.
T-Wolves get steamrolled in Game 5. Season ends, obviously, on a sour note. Now we shift to the off-season chatter. A special shout-out to all you guys, though, all the everydayers out there that always made us your first listen, all you guys coming in the chat with us all season long. We wouldn't be here without you guys. So a huge thank you from Jack and I, truly from the bottom of our hearts. You guys are the best. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Go follow Jack, please, at JRBorman13. I got full confidence in this man. This is the guy you're going to want to follow all off season long for Wolves info. And Jack, I guess we'll catch everybody next season for game 1 of
Yes.
82. We'll run it back. We'll do it all over again. Just had an absolute blast with you all season long. I learned so much, as I know everybody else did, listening to us and watching along. Thanks again, everyone, for a fantastic season in the group chat. Until next time, signing out.